Hi, folks. This is Dr. Mike again. This is chapter number 13, and we're going to talk about equality and discrimination. It seems like each of these subjects that we've taken for these weeks are very, very pertinent to the world that we live in, because we live in a tremendous upheaval in our cultural standing in the world, and we have all kinds of things like Black Lives Matter and these issues with police and discrimination against people, races, and all this stuff. Seems like we've resurged in that. I lived through the 1960s, and I lived through civil rights and gay rights founding and women's rights and all those things and all those protests. And just when you thought you had made progress and you were moving forward, it seemed like somebody just kind of jerked all the bandages off of the wounds and just reopened them. So it seems like we do have a problem today with lots of different aspects of our culture about discrimination, about freedoms. And so I think it would be good for you to pay attention to this chapter and to read it for your own benefit, and then, of course, for the benefit of your children and those around you, because it's really, really important because of the concepts of race and racism and institutional or structural racism, which is very present in many of our entities like our government and our police and all those things. And we want to talk about what equality should be, what it is, and what it should be, and how important that is to our race as a people, as human beings, and as Americans. And I think you'll find that to be most helpful. Let me switch over to my slides, if you would, and we'll talk about a few things here just to get you started. Of course, as I said before, we're just trying to whet your appetite to get you to read the chapter and to take in more of the materials than we have ability to scan. You do understand that this class would take 18 weeks in a normal situation to even touch it. So we're just basically giving you the tools, and then you're working on yourself. So when we talk about discrimination, we are talking about unjustified differential treatment, especially when it applies to race or ethnicity or gender, sexual orientation, or religion. And the U.S. legal system tries its best to eliminate discrimination. And of course, it seems like the more we try, the further behind we get. But civil rights laws are designed to prevent discrimination or to find remedies for discrimination in our world. And some of it works, some of it doesn't. Of course, most of you already know that. We hear a lot of terms today like critical race theory, which is a philosophical approach to studying race and talking about the ontological status of race and moral and social, political import of race and racism in our society. And there's a real battle, like in the state of Florida, where they don't want critical race theory taught, and other places in the South, I'm sure. But race and racism, race is a social construct. It is not, it was really invented in the mid 1800s. If you go back and look at biblical times, there was no such thing as color. Color became this 18th century idea of how we distinguish people apart. And as you know, the more we talk about divisions, the worse things get, instead of talking about the things that we're similar in. Racism is making race a significant factor in the judgment and the treatment of other people. About policemen targeting African Americans and pulling them over and all this stuff that we've talked about. That's one of those. Institutional racism is when the social structures are set up in a way that are oppressive and that are meant to bring people down. Again, like some of our police stations and things like that. Implicit bias is unconscious bias and prejudice that most people harbor in their minds and their hearts, and sometimes it comes out in the most inopportune times. And then there are other forms of discrimination like gender and age and handicap and religion. All of these are holding something against a person for one of those traits, okay? So let's talk about the principle of equality. Some policies treat people differently in ways that harm some and benefit others. If you've ever worked in a factory, you probably have seen that happen, or in a business. You may be, nursing home, whatever. But we have to prove that differences exist if we're to treat people differently. And that's just not really possible. Innate real differences have to be relevant. And the problem for principle is that relevant group differences are often just average differences. They're not anything that is a major thing. So current laws, current issues, we have civil rights, and we've made a lot of advances during 150 years of civil rights, or at least I thought we had until recently. The idea of profiling, where an individual is treated as suspect because of their race or their ethnicity or their religion. When you look at a Muslim lady with her hijab on, the first thing that comes to mind is she's a terrorist, then that is a profiling. Or if you look at a Black person and suspect them of robbing somebody just because they're Black, that's profiling. And then, of course, we have hate crimes, and these crimes are accompanied, motivated by that bias, and often they end up killing or hurting or injuring someone because of who they perceive them to be. And you don't have to look any further than this week's newspaper to see that there's a lot of that goes on in present day America. Affirmative action sought to remedy that and to end preferential treatment. Is it ever justified to treat people in unequal ways for past discrimination? Or so as you look through these things and read, you're going to read different philosophers. A guy by the name of Young talks about the 5 faces of oppression. I think you'll get something out of that. And then 2 others will talk about, as you read through those, talk about the different aspects of racism, maybe something that you haven't even thought about. I was born in South Carolina, lived 60 years there. I remember black and white water fountains, black and white bathrooms, African Americans not being able to come in and sit down at the lunch counter to eat. They had to take their food out the back door. And people just don't, we've gotten away from that. People have forgotten it. But it's really a test and a tough time for, we've made a lot of progress in that. And so one of the things that we need to be very careful to pay attention to is that we don't slip back into the past and forget the things that we've learned in those terrible lessons. So I hope you'll read this, listen to the TED Talk, and then write your information that you're asked to write honestly. And I think you'll find some great learning in this chapter. Okay, I will see you next time. Thanks.